Okay, I think we'll go ahead and start. Good evening. This is Kesha Rogers, and I want to welcome you to our Monday strategic overview with LaRouche Pack. Today, I'll be joined by Barbara Boyd, and Barbara is going to speak on the subject of the path to Trump's victory lies through great art and philosophy. As many of you know, we have continued to discuss the importance of the leadership and the vision that President Trump is presenting, and have continued to emphasize where most people are not talking about solutions and discussing, as President Trump calls it, greatness. We're going to talk about how his vision for greatness, for building new cities, as you heard us discuss with the interview that was done by Brian Lance. If you haven't gone to our website, I'd encourage you to do that. The interview that was done with Susan Kokinda and Brian Lance on why does Trump's Agenda 47 terrify the bankster globalist, and also what we have been discussing around President Trump's commitment to building a renaissance, new cities. He recently discussed that again in one of his latest videos, where he talks about streamlining the federal regulatory agency framework for freedom cities, and calls for allowing them to be the true frontiers for the return of US manufacturing, the invention of new industries, the rebirth of economic opportunity, and safe and affordable living. So we're going to be talking about that more in the context of Barbara's discussion tonight, where, as I said, the path to Trump's victory lies through great art and philosophy. This will be a continuation of the excellent discussion we had this past Saturday that was led by Dan Leach. I encourage you to go to our website and find that. It is entitled The Resilience of the Human Spirit. So with that, I will turn it over to Barbara now to give us her picture.
So there were a lot of specifics in the strategic situation of last week and the beginning of this week. I think people have pretty much been bombarded by the revelations of the young Airman Jack, following close on the revelations by Sy Hersh as to the lies which are being told to the American people about the Ukraine war. These things are indicative of a gigantic war going on within the security state itself and within the elites itself concerning the course of the war in Ukraine, which is lost, and their plans for a future war with China, which we could not really reasonably even do at this point. All of these revelations point to one thing, which is number one, that we have been and are being lied to, which everybody knows. And two, as President Trump says, this must stop now because we're on the edge of World War III. And he has continuously emphasized that fact. The economic collapse, which people are feeling, regardless of all the phony baloney inflation's coming down this week, oh, it's a little bit up, and all of the other indicia which they use to tell you things that otherwise stare you in the face in the form of food, rent, and the other essentials of living, continues. And they say either we're going into a hyperinflationary spiral or a deep recession, and that's all based on what the Fed does or doesn't do. And in all of that discussion, you won't find any plan for actually reviving the US economy, except what President Trump has been proposing. Dominant in that regard is the destruction of the dollar, which has been brought on by Biden's green energy and sanctions policies, and by the dominant non-production in the American economy over the course of ever since really August of 1971, our financialized economy. And if the dollar goes, that will instantaneously put us in almost primal conditions, ourselves and the rest of the world. I might add. There's no kind of new axis of evil, as the neocons would have it, or a new axis of goodness in the world, as the BRICS formation and other people would say. If the dollar goes, we're in for total economic chaos because of the way the world economy is actually organized. Now, official Washington is attempting to spin all of this to their advantage. And as you might ascertain based from past performance, they're into imposing even more censorship, polarization, and distraction to foreclose any intelligent discussion within the population. On the other side of the coin, SpaceX Heavy will blast off in the coming days, although it was scrubbed today, and that will revolutionize space exploration and bring us into an entirely new and very different economic domain. You can read about that in Mike Carr's piece, which is posted to our website. The G7 countries, under the crazed rubric of suppressing Russia's economy even further, coming out of their meeting over the weekend, have promised a huge nuclear power renaissance. Interesting in and of itself, not so interesting insofar as something so fundamental has to be proposed, in their view, on the basis of war. So you have a kind of combined and very uneven development, as one of the most famous economists in world history would say, coming out of last week. Now, I characterize that dynamic consistently as before Trump, or BT. In BT, we lived in a society which seemed to be irretrievably collapsing. That's something he keeps emphasizing in his presentations. We are a nation right now in complete decline, and the symptoms of that are pretty undeniable. We're losing a huge chunk of our young people to drugs and mental illness. Most of them have left the open minds, infectious curiosity, and optimism, which characterizes them as children. And now, as adolescents and young adults, and we hear this from them every day, confront a daily regimen of doom, gloom, and outrage cycled to them through social media and the internet. They are told there is no future in which they will be able to afford a house, raise children, or live in a stable environment in which they could think again and grow. The poorest and most unstable revolt, pouring into the streets to loot. Others commit suicide murders by any means present. Our elites planned it this way for the lower and middle classes, who they hate and who their bubble never allows them to even know. Their economic incompetence and limited imaginations cannot produce a national mission to fire the imaginations and will of our people, and their self-serving cult-like liberal religions deny that such a national mission could or even should exist. According to them, drugs, porn, video games, gambling, other forms of cheap, self-centered, and narcissistic entertainment, or for the more adventurous, little wars in foreign lands, were to keep the hoi polloi distracted, not noticing that society was collapsing around them and more of their friends were disappearing into madness, suicide, or otherwise early death. Our life expectancies are declining here at a very rapid rate. This has been the increasingly evident social reality since the financial collapse of 2008. Yes, the politicians and the pundits on TV infinitely discuss and dissect the very evident problems, but they never offer any solutions. It's as if we are trapped in a matrix with boundaries that preclude thinking outside their created box. That fascist fool, Barack Obama, called this restriction, quote, thinking freely within the stripes at the 40-yard lines. He clearly understood how he was expected to govern. That is all BT. Donald Trump came along and kicked over the boundaries, formed a movement of people who aspired to kick over the same boundaries, and a slow and simmering revolt and resistance started. Now they want to kill him and brainwash and terrorize his supporters. That's the present strategic situation in the larger nutshell. They don't know how to fix the collapsing economy, which they created. They are trapped between hyperinflation and a sooner outright collapse of the economy. They don't know any foreign relations except their insane rules-based post-war World War II permanent warfare regime. Now, over the weekend, my friend Dan Leach gave a class on great art and classical beauty. One of the listeners, I think in somewhat desperate straits, asked him, in effect, what the hell does great art and classical beauty have to do with our present crisis? How does that relate to taking down the deep state? Another friend of mine, who is deeply enmeshed in the battle to eradicate and make potent the MAGA movement, told me about a paradox she had encountered. President Trump has been putting out his bold ideas about his second term, the ideas for the future which in any rational society we would be preparing the citizenry for, debating and organizing for right now. As Kesha noted, President Trump calls this Agenda 47. Yet key people, leaders in the Trump movement, swear they haven't even heard about this or discussed the key concepts like his visionary 10 new cities proposals and baby bonus proposals for a quantum leap in American incomes, the very center of the discussion between Susan Kokinda and Brian Lance on our website. Is the fact that people don't know about this a communication problem related to Truth Social or the disorganization of the Trump campaign, or is it something else? I'm going to argue that it is something else. The attack on this president has been so ruthless that a great fear grips even his greatest supporters, even unconsciously. Why don't they just go to Truth Social, where anyone reading anything knows you can find all his statements? I think it's pretty obvious that people are afraid to be tracked. And what does great art and classical beauty have to do with winning this war? Well, winning this war requires a citizenry who has educated themselves to take power and run the country. It also requires the full exercise of the power that makes us human, creativity, the ability to discover new laws and new ways of operating, which allow us to dramatically change what appears to be a fixed environment, or in modern terms, if you like, in terms of the current discussion, a fixed regime of AI programmed data. Without an almost reflexive creativity, and I emphasize that, reflexive creativity, one from hard study of the entire creative history of the human race, which our forefathers undertook and accomplished, those great men, our forefathers, could not have defeated the British Empire, then the most powerful military force in the entire world. And it is no accident that Lincoln insisted on reading Shakespeare to his cabinet throughout the Civil War. The great issue in philosophy used to be the difference between human beings and animals. Now, society has evolved to a state where the question involves the difference between human beings and computers. But both human courage and human creativity represent qualities no machine operating under the limited rules of AI can replicate. That quality of human beings, willful creativity, is what makes us human, and is also, as LaRouche documented over and over again in his economic works, the primary economic power. It is not little green men under the floorboards running Wall Street stocks. It is willful creativity which creates a productive economy. The courage to win and manifest that individual creativity is what wins wars. If you understand and participate in human creativity in its highest form, it will make you very happy, very bold, and optimistic, and foster further creativity. I hold to you that that's the very essence of Donald Trump. Once you have tasted what it is to be human, you are willing to fight to the death for that, overcoming any fear which stands in the way. That same fierce determination is present in a strong and sovereign culture in which the population identifies with that culture historically, deeply, almost in their blood. Witness the famous map of Napoleon's invasion and retreat from Russia. Kesha, could you please show that map to people? So if you look at this map, what you're going to see is a very interesting war. Napoleon invaded Russia in 1812 with about 500,000 men, and that's the blue line starting up there. And Russia was vastly undermanned in terms of facing what was then the greatest military power in the world. Except they had an understanding of their own country, the weather as a actual weapon, and most importantly, a culture which was willing to try anything, including a fight to the death, to actually prevent Napoleon from taking over the country. So at the very end of that blue line there, through various guerrilla actions by the Russian people, who suffered enormous losses in the course of what became a war of attrition, denying him the ability to forage and to get supplies for his troops, etc. He ultimately gets to Moscow, which then was not the capital of Russia. It was St. Petersburg that was the capital of Russia at the time. And what the Russians did was, once he got there and occupied the city, they burned the entire city down. Their city, their entire city, they burned to the ground. Napoleon was stuck. It was winter at that point in time. He had no supplies. His army was down to the smallest portions, and the Russian people continued to attack through guerrilla tactics. So the brown line, you see his attempted retreat with no supplies in the middle of the Russian winter, under continuous guerrilla attack. A people defeated what was then the largest and most successful army in the world. And they defeated it as a result of a culture which was willing to fight to the death to save their country and to try anything, including burning to the ground one of their most essential cities. Can you imagine the American population of today waging war like that? Trump would do it. The question is, are we capable of doing it? And if we're not, where do we need to go to actually find those resources again? So in 2008, Lyndon LaRouche wrote a paper asking the question, and this will seem very strange to people, are you neotonous? You can read the full paper. Kesha can post where you can read it on the screen later and in the chat. But in that paper, LaRouche describes the concept invented by Julian Huxley called neotony. It has a big relationship to the current situation we're talking about in terms of transsexualism, which is really simply a stepping stone to the WEF's transhumanism. Huxley was really the inventor of that. And Huxley, as LaRouche relates, was in a Satanic circle of the British oligarchical elite, led by Aleister Crowley, who was an outright Satanist. And, you know, basically what LaRouche says is, while he was in the heart of evil and was evil himself, it didn't necessarily make him stupid. Huxley's term neotony referred to a special case in which the species of a lower form of life stops its process of metamorphosis into adulthood, as at the larval phase, never enters the normal adult form of its species, and reproduces that larval or comparable phase in a sexually potent neo-adult larval state. LaRouche says in his paper, imagine that being done on a mass scale to human beings culturally. That, LaRouche says, is what has been done culturally to 3 generations of Americans. The organizational man of the 1950s, the baby boomer generation, which was born of the organizational men of the upper and middle classes of the 1950s, and the baby boomers progeny in the Gen X and Gen Y generations. That particular form of neotony, that is a permanent state of non-adulthood, resulted in the deindustrialization of the country, the irrational green environmental movements, the elevation of a class of professionals and technicians assigned by the oligarchy to manage society, but totally incompetent in their understanding of any human process, like war or physical economy, which can't be programmed in a linear fashion, or which exists outside the infantile psychosexual environment of the neotonist. Now, this was a change. Americans historically were independent and interdirected in their thinking and aspirations. These generations, quite the contrary, were other-directed, deathly afraid of standing outside the box or not fitting in, and therefore deathly afraid of exercising that human quality called creativity. It would make you stand apart. It would make you seem like an intellectual bigwig. It would make you weird. That's how something as insane as wokeness works culturally. There is nothing more dangerous to our present regime than actual human creativity, and they have sought to suppress it at every turn. They have sought to use terror and fear to make us infantile, neotonous, subject to their will. Donald Trump is creative. He is perhaps the first president we have had since Roosevelt who manifested that quality. His 10 cities new mission on federal lands is designed to encourage and grow that creativity in others. A grand, big national mission, a mission of greatness. Here again, just to contrast the discussion which is now ongoing about AI and its dangers, is Lyndon LaRouche on the fundamental question of what it means to be human from the same paper. The human mind, by means of a creative faculty which does not exist in the lower forms of life, is able to change its behavior in a fashion associated with the discovery of universal physical principles. Principles which transform the mentality of human beings to the same effect we would otherwise expect only in the evolution of a qualitatively higher form of new species. This specific power of the human mind is unique among all known living species. The included effect of this cognitive evolution upward of the human mind, evolution as expressed through science and classical modes of artistic composition, is the origin of the qualitative increase of the potential relative population density of the human species. In other words, how do we evolve at higher and higher levels of income and life in an evolving and growing population such that we're not preoccupied with immediate survival, so that we can talk about durable survival for an entire and expanding human race. This evolutionary development through human creativity has 2 general categorical types: physical science and only classical modes of artistic composition. The faculty of mind in both cases is the same. The difference is the application. In one case, the human mind is transforming society's action on nature, and the other, it is the social process of transmission of ideas, which is the medium and mode of creativity. As Dan Leach illustrated this on Saturday, Dante, in the Divine Comedy and in his other works, invented the entire modern Italian language out of Brutus vernaculars to convey the highest levels of idea throughout society. The most significant effects occur in the domain of general basic economic infrastructure, such as the effect from solar power to the higher levels of chemical combustion, to the vastly more efficient use of nuclear fission powered and the use of more physically efficient modes of transport than automobiles, such as rail or maglevs, or Trump's new self-propelled machine idea of lifting yourself up and flying over whole cities. The greatest part of the gains in productivity are found in the impact of advances in basic economic infrastructure upon physical production and in the promotion of the development of the powers of insight of the human mind achieved almost exclusively through scientific or classical cultural principles. It is the employment of classical artists, physical scientists, and an advancing quality of universal healthcare and pensions, the human aspects of basic economic infrastructure in general, which must enjoy, together with science and the machine tool sector, the relatively greatest degree of preference in the expenditure and investment by society in all sectors. In the 10 cities proposal and related baby bonus and qualitative leap in incomes proposals, it is clear that President Trump also understands this. We have to overcome the tendency towards neotony, which has been inculcated into our culture. The means to do that is through the deepest acquaintance with the frontier scientific discoveries which resulted in human economic advances and with the classical forms of art which advanced human creativity. Our goal is an individual able to think creatively, almost reflexively. The genius otherwise found in Ben Franklin, George Washington, Lincoln, and in a dialogue with his own evolving and aspiring to be creative movement, Donald Trump. That's what's required to run the government and to win this war. I once asked LaRouche, what's the key to creativity? He said, work. Lots of disciplined work in the right arena of subjects, the advancing individual discoveries of human beings and the creative planes of classical poetry, art, drama, and music. So to answer our questioner from Saturday, which I thought Bruce and Dan did a very good job on, that's why we're doing these Saturday classes. That's why we're not out there complaining about the culture. I pretty much described to you what its key problems are. We're out there to introduce you to this different world, the world of creative thinking and the world of creative science by which we can actually get out of this mess. Now, in order to overcome the problem which we mentioned, where a lot of people in the Trump movement are not aware of his keystone proposals or Agenda 47, which needs to be debated, discussed, and expanded upon by the Trump movement as a central preoccupation, we've put up a page under our campaigns on the website devoted to Agenda 47 and the very best, we think, exemplifying Trump's ideas in this area. So I'd like Kesha to actually post that up for people, show them how to get to it, and then we'll open it up for discussion.